Teachers, what's some behind-the-scenes drama? My mother was an office administrator at a subunit of our high school. My 10th grade year, they had to stop telling teachers when fire drills would be. There was an actual, small, very manageable fire in the cooking class thanks to a grilled cheese sandwich. Most of the students were evacuated correctly, but lots of teachers figured that since it wasn't a scheduled drill, it was just a test. The fire department tested the alarm every month, or an alarm malfunction. So, they kept the kids in the room. Another office admin had to come over the intercom and announce, "Teachers, since there is very obviously a fire alarm going off, please evacuate the building as per your drill instructions." Edit. The teachers got in huge trouble, no one was hurt, and the girl didn't burn her next grilled cheese.
This reminds me of a time in school when we had a surprise fire drill. I was in science class, and the teacher thought it was just another test. Everyone else got out, but we stayed put. Eventually, someone shouted that it was real, and we rushed out. No harm done, just a little chaos. I guess some teachers need reminders sometimes.
I was having dinner with my co-workers yesterday, and one of their sisters came. She's a teacher. Apparently a kid at her school committed suicide recently, and she or any other of the staff aren't allowed to talk about it. The kids all think he just died in his sleep. She was saying she was trying not to cry all day at work.
That sounds really heavy. It's tough when something like that happens, especially in a school setting. Keeping it all inside must be hard for her and the staff. It's a strange situation when kids are left in the dark, thinking everything is fine. You can feel the weight of it just talking about it. Hope she finds some support to help her through.
Reminds me of my English teacher last year who would tell us anything, really anything, and then just go, "But you didn't hear it from me." This is how we heard the story of the pregnant girl who left for a few months and the history teacher who broke up with her boyfriend because he smoked too much weed. Would have wondered what she said about me if I weren't so boring.
Sounds like your teacher knew how to keep things interesting. It's funny how teachers have this whole other life outside the classroom. It's like they're just as human as we are, dealing with drama and all. Makes you think about what they really say about their students, right? I guess being boring does have its perks. At least she didn't spill any secrets on you.
Our favorite teacher, who taught home EC cooking, was the headmaster's wife. She woman taught up until last Christmas, then took a week's leave before we broke up for the holidays. Come January, back in school, we find out she died. She had cancer for half a year, and we never knew. The whole school was a bit shaken.
That's a tough situation. It's always surprising when someone you see regularly isn't around anymore, especially when you didn't know they were struggling. Losing a teacher who meant a lot can hit hard. It makes you realize how little we sometimes know about what others are going through. The school community probably felt that loss deeply. It's one of those moments that stays with you.
How short we are on money. The school I work at is very strict about paper, for example, so when my students complain about having front and back pages, I pretend that I have some green vibe in me. Plus what happens in the teacher's lounge. If they knew how childish some of my colleagues are, they'd lose any trace respect that might have had before.
It's funny how schools handle money and resources. Everyone acts like they're saving the planet, but really it's just about cutting costs. In the teacher's lounge, it's like a different world. You see grown-ups arguing over petty stuff, like who gets the last slice of pizza or making fun of each other's classroom setups. Makes you wonder about the kind of maturity that comes with working in education.
I want to answer on behalf of my 11th grade English teacher who was going through a divorce and a custody battle for his 4-year-old daughter during the time he spent teaching us. Some days it was very apparent that something was really eating away at him. This teacher had a very distinct personality. You could tell when he was off. I'm sure it was an immensely difficult time for him, especially because he continued to teach us in what was one of the more memorable classes I've ever taken. I didn't find out the details of what was going on until after I graduated and he left the school.
It's interesting how teachers can carry their personal struggles while still being there for their students. I remember mine being off some days, but I never knew he was dealing with a divorce. It must have been tough for him, juggling his work and personal life. It really shows dedication to keep teaching through such a challenging time. It makes you appreciate the effort they put in, even when life gets complicated.
Not teacher. Mom was administrator at the school I went to. Most days, because she worked late, every night I would just chill in the computer lab, hitting up Miniclip like a mofo. So I'm there one night, and I look over my shoulder, and I see my teacher talking to the head teacher. Think nothing of it, of course. It was my teacher's first year at the school, and it was pretty clear to everyone there that she had no fucking clue what she was doing. Couldn't handle the class, nor did she know the subject matter. Next morning, head teacher has a meeting with us that our teacher has been fired, and that the teacher we had last year, who was currently on a 2-year trip in New Zealand surfing, was coming back. TLDR, I watched my teacher get fired.
That's interesting. You'd think a new teacher would bring some fresh energy, but it sounds like she struggled. I remember a friend of mine had a similar situation. The new teacher couldn't control the class, and it was a mess. It's wild how quickly things can change in a school setting. You just never know what's going to happen next. It must have felt surreal to see it go down.
I became friends with a teacher, and after I graduated high school and there was no conflict of interest, he invited me to his birthday the following year. Of course, there were heaps of my old teachers and some new ones from lower year levels I'd never seen before. One of the new ones was talking about how scared one girl made her because she wrote a really detailed creative writing story about a girl with serious mental problems, and what it's like she gave quotes and basically said that now she's read this, a ton of the girl's behavior in class makes sense. At the time I was about 90% sure I knew who she was talking about. So that was really weird and kind of creepy. Hope the teacher talked to her about it, or something.
That's an interesting situation. It's strange how a story can reveal so much about someone. I can imagine being in that kind of environment, just listening to teachers discussing students. It makes you think about the impact of creative expression. I wonder if that teacher actually had a talk with the girl. It's important for teachers to check in on students, especially when they show deeper struggles through their work.
I teach comma science at a college. One of our recent graduates faked her degree. I know that sounds crazy. She failed one of my colleagues' courses recently, which should have kept her from graduating. But this girl had a friend in our registrar's office who substituted the course for something entirely unrelated. The substitution must be approved by me, since I'm her advisor. I said no, but she somehow still got her diploma. The substitution is on her degree audit with no record of who approved it. Our department has since been in a long struggle with the registrar's office over who permitted the substitution. Whoever did this should be fired. Well, I know exactly who did it, but there's no paperwork to prove it. So the world will keep spinning, and somewhere out there an employer will hire this girl and be extremely disappointed. Edit, grammar, and I still don't think I did it right.
That's quite the situation. It's frustrating to see someone get through like that, especially with the help of a friend in the office. You put an effort to keep things fair, but the system let you down. It's likely she'll face the consequences eventually when she can't perform in a real job. Just another reminder that sometimes people find ways around the hard work. Disappointing for everyone involved.
I grew up in a pretty small town. One where everyone knows everyone and their dog's business, so it's hard for anything to be kept quiet. Our middle school principal, when I was a student, who was always such a level-headed and nice guy, called the entire school into the assembly hall late one year and made us sit there while he dropped the school's entire collection of calculators out of a box onto the floor and proceeded to kick them around the floor, yelling at us for being so destructive with them and costing the school so much money. I remember the other teachers sitting behind him, bugging their eyes out, but not saying anything at all. That was the beginning of a lot of outbursts, some aimed at students, some at teachers, some at the entire school. We went off for summer break, and when we came back, we were informed he died of a massive brain hemorrhage. Turns out he had a nasty brain tumor that he'd hidden from the entire faculty that had caused a huge change in his personality.
That's a tough story. It's weird how life can change someone so suddenly. I remember a teacher who was really calm, then one year he just snapped during class. Everyone was shocked. Later, we found out he was dealing with personal issues. It makes you think about what people might be going through behind the scenes. We just see the surface, and sometimes it hides a lot.
My 7th grade science teacher, who really propelled me on my life course of becoming a science teacher, was gay. Unfortunately, she worked and I attended a small Catholic K-8 school. She loved Xena, warrior princess. We saw her around our small town with her best friend, always with her best friend. All the other teachers at this small school must have known, but it would have been scandalous if the parents found out or if she ever dared to share with us who she was as a person. One day she cried because a kid had written homophobic things about another kid on a bathroom stall. I mean, full-on bald. I'll never forget sitting there in class and just searching in my head as to why she would react in this way. In hindsight, I can't imagine what she was going through not being able to share who was. Older me just wants to go back in time and hug her to tell her it will be alright. Younger me didn't quite comprehend the scope of pain she must have felt.
It's interesting how impactful teachers can be, especially when they're not free to be themselves. Your teacher seemed to carry a heavy weight while trying to inspire her students. It's hard to grasp the emotions and struggles she dealt with. Seeing someone you respect break down over something so cruel really sticks with you. It's a reminder of the importance of acceptance and understanding in a person's life.
My IT teacher from high school approached me once while I was taking parts inventory for one of his classes since I was his TA to ask me how to stay positive when a family member has cancer. Backstory: 2 months prior to my senior year, my teacher's daughter had gotten leukemia and was in really bad shape. Now, this teacher always has a happy attitude and loves teaching IT, and this event really brought him down. Anyways, I explained to him that everything was going to be alright and that his daughter was well taken care of by the professionals at UMC here in Tucson. Hell, if they were able to get Gabrielle Giffords back on her feet after the shooting, they could help his daughter get through her leukemia. What started out as advice turned out to be a pep talk in which he relayed to his daughter, ultimately giving her the persistence to fight her cancer. She's been cancer-free since fall 2013. TLDR gave a teacher a pep talk on how to deal with a loved one that was stricken with cancer.
Not many people realize how much influence a simple conversation can have. I was just a student, but helping my teacher stay positive during a tough time showed me the weight of words. His daughter's fight against leukemia was huge, and it mattered to her that he stayed strong. Now she's cancer-free, which is a reminder that hope can sometimes come from unexpected places.
I remember once in 6th grade, me and a bunch of other kids were acting all rowdy until the substitute teacher had enough and called out one of the kids for his behavior, Josh, or his name was, I forgot. How would your mother feel if she knew you were acting like this? John kind of just stopped and looked at her with a blank face and said, "My mother's dead." Without missing a beat, the teacher replied, "Well, why don't you just get a new one?" The whole class went berserk, kids swearing at the teacher, flipping tables, running out of the classroom, throwing shit at the teacher, and while everybody, myself included, went ape shit, Josh kind of just sat at his desk and started twirling his pencil. Anyways, principal got involved and managed to quiet everything down and made sure not a word of the incident reached the rest of the school. TLDR, kids acts up, teacher acts wrong.
That story really brings back memories. I remember a similar situation in school where a teacher lost control and things got chaotic. It was one of those moments where everyone just fired up together. The tension in the room was wild. But in the end, it just reminded me how unpredictable kids can be, and sometimes adults don't really know how to handle it. Always entertaining in a way, though.
I work in special education, and you would not believe how much I have to battle with administration and teachers for them to participate in everyday activities, such as be in a certain class, an after-school sports team, go to a dance, etc. The kids have no idea the arguments, emails, phone calls, writing up extra behavior contracts, etc. I go through for them, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Don't mess with my kids. Edit. Thank for the gold, kind stranger.
That sounds really tough. It's crazy how much you have to fight for these kids to just enjoy regular activities. They probably don't see all the behind-the-scenes work, but it must feel good knowing you're standing up for them. It's cool that you're so dedicated to making sure they have those experiences. Keep doing what you're doing.
Probably going to get buried, but I lecture at a university as a side job to my profession. 2 classes or so per semester. So, right before the winter semester, my father passed away suddenly while playing tennis. He was 65. I was 28 at the time, and I will never forget how hard it was to teach. Not only teach, but be engaging, humorous, and passionate about my subject. Behind my eyes, I was crippled with depression. It took me until this past year to get over that hump. May not seem like a lot given the stories here, but I was surprised I made it through the semester. Then the year. Then the following year. I have never before had to put on an empty smile so hard in my life, but end of the day, it is a job. A job I am paid to do. It is a job I happen to love.
That sounds really tough. Losing someone like that can hit hard, especially when you have to keep going with your responsibilities. It's impressive you managed to push through while dealing with your own feelings. Teaching can be demanding, and it's not always easy to keep that energy up. At least you found a way to love the job despite the circumstances. That resilience is worth acknowledging.
Well, I have one for this. It wasn't really behind the scenes since everyone kind of guessed what was happening. In high school, we had 2 math teachers, one algebra girl and one for geometry guy. We always teased them about being together, and whenever they talked to each other, there was always this adorable smile between them that showed us they liked each other. One day after geometry class, the guy teacher tells us he is resigning from his job. He tells us that there are some rules that he just doesn't agree with. Turns out, it is against the rules to have a relationship with a coworker, and he ended up quitting so they could be together. This was 5 years ago, and there are some rumors of them getting married.
That's a nice story. It's interesting how school crushes can turn into real-life relationships. I guess the teachers took a big step, choosing love over rules. It's good to hear they might be getting married now. Shows that sometimes you have to prioritize what really matters to you. A bit of drama in school can lead to something meaningful later on.
One of the Italian teachers that I had in HS got fired. When she didn't come to class, a teacher covering for her said she was sick and going to be out for the rest of the school year. Then when we got a preeminent sub, there was a different excuse. I found out from my sister, who found out from one of her really good friends who keeps in touch with one of the other foreign language teachers. The Italian teacher used fund-raised money to fly an Italian exchange student from Italy all the way to where we are, because 2 of the students fell in love during the exchanges.
That's a wild situation. It's interesting how news spreads in schools. You just can't rely on what you hear directly. People talk, and those stories become something else. It's kind of nice that a teacher would go through that effort for students' love, though. But getting fired over it? Yeah, that seems a bit extreme. It shows how complicated things can get behind the scenes. Schools have a lot of layers, for sure.
A chronic illness that made me nauseous pretty much all the time and occasionally very dizzy. I generally hid it really well while teaching, and my coworkers were able to help me out when things got really bad. I'm no longer teaching, it was always a temporary thing, and doing better now, but I still don't know how I made it through that year as well as I did.
It's tough dealing with something like that, especially when you have to maintain a professional front. It's good that your coworkers were supportive. It must have been draining to manage both the illness and the teaching. It's a relief to hear you're doing better now. Sometimes you just push through without realizing how strong you are until later. Glad you've moved on and are feeling better.
My AP chemistry teacher in high school had a 12-year-old daughter with leukemia. She would drive 5 hours every weekend for treatment, and I'm sure it was on her mind at all hours of the day, but she was still one of the best teachers I've ever had. It wasn't a secret from any of the students, but not once did she let it affect her work.
It's impressive how some people manage to keep their focus on their responsibilities, even in really tough situations. Your chemistry teacher clearly cared a lot about her job, despite what was happening in her personal life. It's a reminder that resilience can show in unexpected ways. Her ability to stay committed to her students during such a challenging time speaks volumes about her character.
Worked IT in a school for a while. When I joined, they were almost done dealing with the aftermath of the old head of music who had essentially been fired for being shit, bullying other staff, and getting away with as little as possible. She also signed off on long-term sick leave, but still gave private singing lessons to school students against the rules. She had and still has a bit of a reputation in some circles, but she was very good at making friends and getting people on her side. They eventually managed to get rid of her after it emerged that she'd been fiddling coursework results, but she decided to take the school to court for unfair dismissal. I had no idea how much the students knew when I was there, but it kind of went without saying that you don't discuss it with them.
That sounds like a tough situation. Working in a school can be complicated, especially with staff dynamics. It's weird how someone can manage to manipulate the system for so long, even when they're clearly not doing their job. The fact that students were probably aware of everything adds another layer. You just have to focus on your work and not get dragged into the drama. It's good they finally took action, though.
College instructor here. Some typical stuff. There are always gossipy faculty who talk shit about staff and students. Tenured professor so-and-so, with multiple degrees and accolades, is really racist. Your adjunct professors are highly qualified, experienced, and caring mostly. Yeah, they earn less than $15K per year. The most absurd thing occurred a few years back. The internet was down for several days on the entire campus. IT department couldn't figure it out. The main modem/router device was broken. They had to call AT&T and wait 2 days for a replacement.
Sounds pretty typical for a college. You've got the usual gossip among faculty, which is just part of it. Then there's the tenured guy acting all high and mighty but hiding some serious issues. Even adjuncts, who really care and know their stuff, get the short end of the stick. That internet outage must have been a mess. Waiting on AT&T for days is never ideal, especially when everyone relies on it.
This will probably get buried, but I'll throw it out anyway. My dad is an oncologist. When I first started high school, some teachers had already heard about me, which I thought was funny since I never knew anyone that had been there before. When I told my parents about this, my dad shrugged it off and said he knew a guy. Fast forward to my sophomore year. One of the English teachers died after a long bout with cancer that none of the students were aware of. He was a well-loved teacher, and it shook the student body up quite a bit. When I told my dad this, he said, "I know. I was with him last night when he died." Turns out my dad was his oncologist for years. I had never really put it together in my head, but now it made sense. That's how my teachers all knew me when I first started. I can only imagine what it was like for the staff who knew to keep that from the students, especially near the end.
That's a heavy story. It's strange how small the world feels sometimes. You never really think about the connections people have until something like that happens. I can see how having that knowledge would weigh on the teachers, trying to keep it from the students. It puts everything in perspective, especially in high school where you think life is just about classes and friends. It's a reminder that there's more to people's lives than what we see.
Had to reapply for my own job each of the years I taught. A colleague was both applying for my job and on the board doing the interviews for the position. Yes, I debated suing the school over this and other violations. He ended up hiring a woman to one of the two positions available and subsequently had an affair with her, then divorced his wife and married her. That was but a wee drop in the bucket that was crazy at that school.
Sounds like a tough situation to be in. Having to reapply for your own job every year would add a lot of stress. It's wild that your colleague was applying for the same position while on the board. The affair part just adds another layer of drama. Can't imagine how that affected the atmosphere at the school. It must have been quite the experience, dealing with all that chaos.
It's weird. In school, the weird kid is just a weird kid. In such an egocentric developmental period, most don't stop to wonder if there's something deeper. I know I didn't. My youth pastor in high school worked as a counselor in a couple of middle schools and told us about a stereotypical weird kid who smelled, wore tattered, ill-fitting clothes, and never talked to anyone. IRC, the backstory was his mom volunteered at a wolf reserve. She took him with her one day and left him in the car while she went in to feed the wolves / whatever. Something went awry and they snapped and killed her with him watching from inside the car, stuck until some other volunteers showed up / came outside. Dad went off the deep end, shut down, and the kid basically raised himself from an early age. It was a real lesson in empathy and prejudice.
That story hits differently. It's easy to dismiss someone as just a weird kid without thinking about what they might be going through. I remember a classmate who never spoke much. Turns out, he had a tough home life and felt isolated. Sometimes, understanding someone's background can change how you see them. It's a reminder to be more empathetic, especially towards those who seem different.
Replied to someone else with this. That's odd. My dad was a principal at a Carter school, pretty small school, and he had cancer for 2 years. He never told the students, but I think he told the staff. He worked for those 2 years, and when we went on spring break, he got really sick and passed away the week after. I always wondered how it would feel to have not know and then him be gone. The students were very sweet and supportive and made my family many notes and etc. The entire student body even came to his funeral. I don't know what stage cancer you are, but you keep rocking it. And I'd say don't feel pressured to tell the students.
That's a tough situation. Loss can hit hard, especially when you don't see it coming. It's nice to hear that the students were supportive. They probably didn't fully understand, but the care was there. Sometimes, it's easier to keep things private. It's good you can reflect on it and share that experience. It might help others in similar places. Just keep doing what you do and take care of yourself.
At my primary school, the fire alarm and lockdown alarm were the same. So once when there was a real fire, my teacher told us it was a lockdown. We spent about 10 minutes in a room filling with smoke before she decided it might actually be a fire. For kids went to hospital because of asthma problems caused by the smoke. Edit. They were almost the same. Fire was something like and lockdown was
That sounds pretty scary. It's wild how a simple mistake can lead to a real crisis. I can only imagine the confusion everyone felt. It's funny but also kind of serious that the alarms were so similar. Kids getting sick from smoke is really unfortunate. Glad to hear everyone made it through, but I bet the teacher felt terrible about it. Sometimes those little details can really make a big difference in an emergency.
I live in a high-risk earthquake area. All through elementary and high school, we would have the occasional drill, get your desk, wait until no more aftershocks, etc., etc. In grade 4, there was some power washers or something outside our class doing their thing. About halfway through the day, there's an actual earthquake. It wasn't very big, but they do typically make a lot of noise and was shaking the building. Anyways, we all look at our teacher and she just says, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's probably just the window cleaners." Now, we all may have been only in grade 4, but we had all felt an earthquake before, but the teacher told us not to worry. Anyways, soon after, the principal comes over the PA and thanks everyone for ducking and covering, and that we can go back to normal now. The look on her face, I still remember to this day.
That's kind of wild. I mean, being in an earthquake drill and having your teacher downplay it was something else. Kids can be pretty clueless sometimes, but they definitely knew the difference. I can imagine the mix of confusion and relief when the principal announced everything was all right. It's funny how educators can sometimes underestimate what kids actually know. That teacher probably learned to pay more attention after that.
The lone art class I tried to take in college was going to be mostly textbook work and was promptly dropped. But I feel like schools try and make film classes and art classes textbook heavy, because it's really hard to justify a class where kids watch movies when there are budget considerations, even if it is from an artistic perspective. My college roommate took a film class and had to watch all the actual films outside of class hours.
I get that. Art and film classes often end up being more about theory than hands-on experience. It's kind of disappointing when you want to explore creativity but get stuck with textbooks instead. Your roommate's situation isn't surprising either. Watching movies outside of class doesn't really feel like a class, just extra homework. It seems like schools often prioritize budget over letting students engage in real creative activities.
I had a principal who was just about as incompetent. She'd walk into homeroom during the last 10 seconds before the bell, and then chewed me out in front of all my students for not teaching anything. I got written up because the passing rate in the remedial class I was teaching was only about 50%. I actually thought it was pretty good considering the attendance rate was only about 30%. I joined the teachers' union the next day, and she never really bothered me again. This was pretty much how she dealt with everyone except the people who kissed her ass all the time.
Sounds like you had a rough time with that principal. It's frustrating when people in charge don't understand the actual situation. Your decision to join the teachers' union was smart. Sometimes, taking a stand is the only way to protect yourself. It's interesting how some people can get by just by flattering the higher-ups while others actually put in the work and struggle.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.